What's up, y'all, and welcome back to the Atlanta Falcons Podcast Network. I'm Will McFadden. We are here at the 2026 NFL Scouting Combine in fabulous Indianapolis, Indiana. We have an amazing slate of national media guests that myself and Tori McElhaney are going to be talking to throughout the afternoon. You guys are about to hear those conversations. We're going to kick things off with Kevin Fishbain and Kelsey Russo, who do an excellent job covering the Bears and the Browns, respectively. We're going to talk to them about the newest additions to the Atlanta Falcons organization, Ian Cunningham and Kevin Stefanski. Following them up, we've got Cam Wolfe, Albert Breer, Charles Davis, and Greg Auman, who are going to just kind of give their perspective on the state of the Falcons, the draft, combine, free agency, Kyle Pitts. It's all coming up next. It's great. Stay tuned and enjoy. We are sitting down with Kevin Fishbain, senior writer at The Athletic, who does a great job covering the Chicago Bears. Obviously, we have a former Chicago Bear now in the building here in Atlanta with Ian Cunningham. So, Kevin, he's been kind of considered an up-and-comer in the front office ranks for a while. How did he earn that reputation?
Well, when you work for the Ravens and Ozzie Newsome, when you work for the Eagles and Howie Roseman, you're already going to have a lot of great experience with really good GMs and really good teams and good coaches. Then he comes to the Bears, he gets the number 2 job. The Bears have never had an assistant GM before, so already that was kind of a bit of a hallmark for him to get that title. And then working hand-in-hand with Ryan Poles, he went through a really difficult rebuild that resulted in what was last season, which was really just this magical run that surprised a lot of people. So he's worked around some really great people. He's been around different types of teams, different types of quarterbacks, different types of coaches. So I think the experience is there, and certainly you can see the different interviews he's had over the years. He's always kind of been in line for this opportunity.
So we were talking to him earlier today about his first year with the Bears, that 2022 off season, which was the year that they went from, a few draft picks to having 11, didn't have a first round draft pick that year. He was talking about how much they had to do to kind of accrue all of that capital. Can you talk to us a little bit about what kind of that year was and kind of the ramifications of that in maybe a positive way thereafter?
Yeah, I mean, it's not a fun spot for any GM to be in. I mean, they came in and they inherited a really difficult situation and not a lot of cap space. They didn't have the first round pick. And they had a lot of contracts they had to get rid of, and they knew they weren't going to be good that year. And for them, they accumulated the draft picks. They made some kind of shrewd trades to get more draft picks moving forward. And you look at the first pick that regime made was Kyler Gordon, who's one of the best slot corners in football, who got an extension. The next pick was Jaquan Brisker, who will probably get a decent contract in free agency. Who turned out to be, when healthy, a really solid safety. So, but that was, I mean, can you imagine you get to be an assistant GM and you're working with one of your good friends and you don't have a first round pick
right.
And you have all these contracts you got to get rid of and it's going to be a difficult year. So I think that you guys know this, that football coaches love using the word calloused. Like, I feel like that really calloused a lot of people in that front office that, hey, and for Ian, it's like, hey, I got through this. I can kind of get through anything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think Kevin Stefanski said in his opening presser, smooth seas don't make skilled sailors. Mm-hmm. That's exactly what that kind of makes me think of. But one of the first clips I think I saw of Ian Cunningham after kind of the announcement was made was that clip of the 2024 draft. Him sitting next to Ryan Poles, kind of maybe urging patience with Rome Odunze when it looked like Poles was getting a little antsy. Is that indicative of kind of the composure as you've gotten to know Ian Cunningham over the years?
Yeah, I think actually both of them are pretty steady people, and in that moment, the heat of the emotion, I think Ian kind of provided that. We heard stories when Ian first got the job, the two of them, they lived together. They woke up really early and went to the Starbucks together and went to the facility together, and they were with each other all the time until their families got settled. And I think that moment was really reflective of the two of them understanding each other. And that's where I think, for Atlanta's purposes, the relationship that Ian had with Ryan and then what the relationship Ian, obviously everybody wants him to have with Matt Ryan, is going to be so important, because he had that with one of Matt Ryan's best friends and roommate and teammate in Ryan Poles. So yeah, that moment, I think Ian, when the few times we got a chance to talk to him, always just very steady, didn't seem like an emotional guy to us, and what is a very emotional job. And I think he really did a good job for Ryan Poles to be that sounding board and to be that guy to kind of keep everything right here, just not to go too high or too low.
One last question and we'll get you out of here. Ian Cunningham has talked a lot about how his philosophy is, building in the trenches, and he's a former offensive lineman through and through. He talked about that being one of his favorite positions to scout just because of the bias that he has about it. How did the Chicago Bears over the last few years really embody that piece of what now is Ian Cunningham's philosophy with the Falcons?
Well, going back to the whole part of seeing so many different things, Ian saw it not work and then it worked. They've made signings and draft picks of offensive line that didn't pan out. And then last year, they get a head coach who has a vision for the offensive line. They take a big swing. They trade for Joe Tooney, who ends up being the protector of the year. They trade for Jonah Jackson, who had a phenomenal season. They signed Drew Dahlman, who you guys know who was the best center in free agency. And they ended up having one of the best offensive lines in football. And I think, too, we look at Darnell Wright, who was their first-round pick, Ian Cunningham and Ryan Poles had, at the position the two of them played, and had a really good rookie year, an iffy second year, and then was a second-team All-Pro last year. And that was their guy that they kind of been able to watch through this, and they were able to kind of go with the peaks and valleys with him. So I think that he's seen that you have to keep taking swings, and that's not always going to work out. And what they were able to do this offseason, I think, is a great blueprint for anybody to be like, hey, in one offseason, you really can overhaul a position group if you have the resources, if you have the right people in place, and you can see it. So I think the 2025 Bears definitely probably validated what Ian would tell anybody, which is it starts in the trenches, as you said. That offensive line was so good this past year, and it was the best Bears season we've seen in a long time.
Awesome. Well, Kevin, thank you so much for taking the time to sit down with us. Everybody, please go check out his coverage on The Athletic. We are excited to be joined now by Kelsey Russo, who is basically just our doppelganger over at clevelandbrowns.com. Yep. Kelsey, thank you for sitting down with us.
Of course. Thanks for having me on. I'm excited.
So obviously, we share a mutual acquaintance, I think, in Kevin Stefanski.
Yes.
Who has gone from being your head coach to ours. And, we want to just learn a little bit about him. So what's your overall impression on kind of Kevin Stefanski as a head coach during his time with Cleveland?
Yeah, absolutely. So in the 3 seasons I've been there, so getting to know him and really seeing how he commands the locker room, commands a team, he really tries to just show his best self to the guys and really want to just encourage them to be themselves, which I really think is a good trait. If he wants the guys to be their best selves, put their best foot forward, and it's very team focused, which I think is really important, especially in football. That's such a big aspect of this game. It's a collective responsibility. Everything is collective. It's never pointing fingers. It's never, this side of the ball is not doing as well, et cetera. It's collective of how do we get better, because when the collective is all good, that's how you have the best result. And so I think, he's a little bit quieter, but I think the way that he still finds a way to connect with the guys and really, be very personable in his own manner, I think is really endearing to teammates and, to his players, because they can relate in different ways. I think a lot in one-on-one settings, he's really good with players of really getting to know them as people, as, what's going on in their lives, while also building that, professional relationship with head coach to player of, okay, yes, this is who you are as a person, but then also this is what we need from the football side of it. Yeah. So I think it's a really good combination. He was so well liked in the building. He had really, really great relationships, obviously, with everybody on the coaching staff, with Andrew Berry, and they had a very good, close personal relationship as well as professional relationship, which I think is a great combination for GM and head coach when you're leading a team through the ups and downs, through trying to, improve and win games and everything. So,
Something that came up in Kevin Stefanski's kind of first introductory was he was talking about how of a maniac he is with player development.
Yes.
And he talked about kind of creating IDPs almost for individual development plans for each individual. Is that something that you saw over the course of his time in Cleveland, and kind of how did that pop up, do you think, for maybe specific players?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, he was so big on player development. That was such a big thing. He was we are in the business of development, is what he said all the time, which I think is so critical and something that isn't really talked about necessarily as much. You just kind of look at what's happening on the football field, but behind the scenes, there's so much happening. And it was very individualized because players are individual people. They have different parts of their skill sets that are stronger, weaker, etc., that they need to address. And so that dedication to that aspect of meeting the player where they're at, looking at specific things in their game that they want to improve, being able to look at what's really strong in their game and being able to maximize that was something that I think he was really good at and instilled in his staff as well. That was big across the staff. Yeah. So offense, defense, special teams, those position coaches as well were super dedicated to working with those guys, to improving them as players and really getting to the nitty-gritty, the fundamentals of their game, which I think you saw pop up as rookies, younger guys took that step forward. Last year I think of you think of Harold Fannin, who...
That's the first name that came to my mind.
Exactly, yeah. Who, Bowling Green, came in and really stepped into a starting role and is going to be a really big tight end for us this year. I think of, honestly, even Shedeur Sanders, the growth in his development, not playing, working through the off season and really developing his game, taking steps forward to stepping into that backup role to then stepping into a starting role. And then even working through those struggles, it was all about development. And I think that was a really at the heart of everything he tried to do for, this past rookie class, but also rookie classes in previous years to really get the most out of the guys, because that's how, you win games and you build an offense, build defense, special teams to the levels that you want.
Yeah, I think, too, kind of that development plan adds a level of accountability because you are always kind of bolstering the entire roster, and you maybe have more guys at your disposal that you feel comfortable with at any given point if an injury happens or just somebody's kind of not cutting it. And you kind of are always keeping everybody prepared, and you really do have a cohesive locker room. You mentioned Shedeur. Obviously, the quarterback situation in Cleveland has been dicey, I guess, for lack of a better word, for the last few years. But to me, that is one of the real checks and green flags for Kevin Stefanski, is how he was able to navigate a really difficult situation at the most important position in Cleveland. And that is, it's really that second kind of Coach of the Year award that I really think is emblematic of the type of coach he can be. Because going to the playoffs with, Joe Flacco leading for 5 games, and obviously I think Deshaun started that season, but having 3 or 4 different quarterbacks in the span of a season and still making the playoffs, that's a testament to the coaching. So how did you see him navigate specifically kind of the offense around the quarterback? Did it change depending on who was in there? Did he try to mold each quarterback into his offense? How did all of that work?
I think it's kind of a combination of both. So Kevin Stefanski's offenses have been what they have been, creating, those passing opportunities, but using that wide zone run game aspect of it. However, there was also an adaptability piece to it of whichever quarterback is out there, you have to use their skill sets and maximize their skill sets. So I think of that season. So that was my first season.
Oh, wow.
And so, yeah.
Welcome to the NFL.
Exactly.
And drinking water out of a fire hydrant.
Oh, yes. Yep. One thing after another. But, when Joe Flacco came into the picture, an older quarterback who has been around the league but has the ability to throw the ball. And so they really utilize that to their advantage. And we saw that he had multiple 300-yard passing games. He won Player of the Week through the air, and just different opportunities where they tried to utilize that part of his skill set. And then I think of this past year, while the offense really was at the core the same, it still changed a little bit with Dylan Gabriel, with Joe, with Shedeur, to again utilize their skill sets and kind of what worked best, with also what was happening on the offensive line, with their run game, with their receiving core, etc. And so it was a blend of what does the offense look like currently player-wise, and then how do we utilize each individual skill set to build a collective offense that works, or in trying to get the best out of those guys.
Okay.
So it's funny because Kelsey and I are like really good friends. We went to the University of Georgia together. Like, have been friends for years and years.
Go Dogs.
And so as soon as Kevin Stefanski was hired, I picked up the phone and I called Kelsey. And one of the first questions I asked you, I was like, okay, tell me a little bit about like offensive play calling. I was like, because Kevin says that Tommy Rees is play calling. I know that Kevin started the year last year with Cleveland being the main play caller, and then 10 games in, handed that over to Tommy Rees. And, you know, I know the offense in and of itself, like, had some lows, but when you look at kind of that handoff, what did you take away from that part of last season and what it could mean for Tommy Rees moving forward?
Yeah, I think it said a couple of things. I think him recognizing that they were struggling as an offense, things weren't going well, and they needed to make a change, said a lot to me about accountability of I'm willing to do whatever is necessary to make this work and find success. So if I'm not going to call plays, Tommy's going to call plays, let's try it, let's do it. That said a lot to me just about his own accountability while also asking for accountability from players as well. So you take accountability for your role in the struggles, and I'm going to take accountability for my role, and that's just how that works. You know, I think when you kind of looked at the dichotomy of the two of them, Kevin's play calling might have been a little bit more conservative in a sense, while I feel like with Shedeur, Tommy took a little bit more risk in the sense of looking downhill and throwing those deep passes. I think of the Raiders game, and he had that like 69-yard pass to Dylan Sampson and for a touchdown, and It was insane. And I was like, I watched it happen, I was like, what is happening? It was crazy. But so, you know, Tommy stepping into for the first time as an NFL offensive coordinator, I think he was a little bit more willing to take that risk because he had watched what was going on and they had conversations, and I think that was something I noticed. I mean, even when Tommy got hired as offensive coordinator and Kevin was like, I'm going to call plays at first, it wasn't a split where it's like, I'm head coach, you know, I'm offensive coordinator. They worked so in tandem to build the offense, build the scheme, build the plays for the week. And it was just like more so just a like somebody has to call the plays, so I'm going to call them kind of thing. But even when Tommy took over, that didn't stop. They still worked in tandem. They still built the offensive scheme for the week, you know, the play calls, etc. together, which I think said a lot about their relationship and the trust that they have in one another for the offense you're building. So, but there are some differences. I think, you know, Tommy did have the liberty to call what he thought would be best, and so he took chances. And some of them worked and some of them didn't. And he would talk about, you know, if there was a play, I can't remember specifically, but I'm remembering one where he talked about, I can't remember the play, but he talked about how he was like, that didn't work, probably should have called something else. But that self-awareness of, okay, yeah, that didn't work, but we took that chance, and that's okay, I think also was really good growth for Tommy stepping into this role. And I think now in Atlanta, Kevin continuing that trust in Tommy to call plays, I think says a lot, not only about the growth that Tommy had while he did call plays for the last part of the season, but also in their relationship as they're stepping into this new opportunity in Atlanta, you know, running this offense, but the trust in one another that I'll call plays, you're the head coach, and we can do this as a team to find the success that we want.
I think that makes a lot of sense, and it makes sense at this point in time, too, where coming to a new organization, there's a lot of moving parts at this time of year especially. Having somebody that you can kind of hand off a lot of those responsibilities to who is like-minded because you've worked so closely together for the last year makes a lot of sense, whereas in Cleveland, you know, maybe Kevin had a better feel for the whole organization having been there for a long time, and you keep some of that stuff on your plate. Can you help us understand maybe a little bit of what does Kevin Stefanski care about when it comes to, during the 60 minutes of a football game, the little micro advantages that you can gain, be it time of possession, execution in situational moments, turnovers, things like that? Were there things in press conferences that he kind of kept harping on or pointing to as we've got to be better here or execute here to win these games?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think of the turnovers. That was a really big thing. I think in the past couple of years, you know, they always talked about the need to protect the ball. So whether that's from quarterback standpoint, that's from, you know, the pass catcher, that's from running back, etc. not turning the ball over was such a big component, and that they all played a role in that. So it wasn't just whoever had the ball in their hands. It was, the tight ends blocking and protecting those guys. It was the quarterback being able to read the situation and make the right call of either throwing the ball away or taking the sack, making the right decision. Yeah. So a lot of it really broke down to making a good decision. So I think that, and then we talked a lot about third down, so the importance of those plays. And so, obviously you want to advance on first and second down, but when you are in those third down situations, the need to convert, and the need to make a positive play to not put yourself in a tough fourth down situation where either you have to punt, or if you go for it, you're in a tougher spot where you risk, giving the other team good field position. And so that was a really big component of the need to be successful on third down. So I think those two things offensively were really important, but then also to being able to find success both in the run and the pass game. So whatever the situation of the game was, so being able to adapt in situational football of like, okay, this defense is doing, they're defending the run really strongly, so we're going to have to pass more. Okay, so what does that look like? How do we adjust offensively, with our tight ends, with our wide receivers, to have a successful pass game? If the pass game's not working, how do we utilize the run game to our advantage to be able to advance the ball forward, where then you can create those passing opportunities? And so I think he has a really good understanding of situational football, of when you need to adjust on the fly and being able to make things work with whatever is happening with the success or the struggles that you're having as the offense is, going throughout the game.
Wow, that's so insightful. I can tell why you picked up the phone immediately and called Kelsey when Kevin was hired. Thank you so much for sitting down with us, Kelsey. This was amazing. Everybody, please go check out her work, associate editor and staff writer for the Cleveland Browns. Thank you again.
Of course. Thanks for having me on, guys.
We are sitting down with Cam Wolfe of the NFL Network, who does an incredible job covering really the league, but you, I feel like, have a special affinity for the Atlanta Falcons.
I do.
Right?
I do. Who doesn't, right? I enjoy covering the Falcons, mostly because I grew up with a lot of Falcons fans, and the passion, the pain that comes through.
Crew.
That comes through it, and to me, I connect more with passionate fan bases because they want the news, they want the nuggets, the stories, and so I know when I go to Atlanta or talk about Atlanta, their ears are going to perk up. They want to know any nugget that you got about their quarterback, their new head coach, their general manager, whatever it is, and so and it's a cool city too, so who wouldn't?
So why should the hire of Kevin Stefanski ignite even more passion for the Falcons fans?
Well, first of all, I think people should know the respect that Kevin Stefanski has around the league. I think that don't let how it ended in Cleveland confuse you. He's regarded as one of the best schemers, first of all, in the league offensively, and how he builds up a young team has been impressive to watch, in multiple places. And I got to cover Cleveland a lot, and that situation was difficult. You've got a quarterback who is maybe bigger name-wise than the team, and you deal with that, and I saw how he, regardless of what the public said, was very intentional in how he wanted to go about the process, and he evolved based on the needs of each of his players at the time. And when you think about where Atlanta is, with Michael Penix coming off a serious injury, you're going to have a different offseason. You're going to have different guys maybe in OTAs or in training camp than you do week 1 or even week 8. So I think you have a coach who has experience of navigating that position, first of all, a huge asset. And then I'm thinking about all the playmakers that we see in Atlanta, and I think the big question always is, how do you maximize those guys? How do you not only have Bijan be the best running back in football, how is he the best player consistently in football every single game? Not just in spurts, but then take a 50-yard game. How can he do that every game? How can you make Drake London a top 5 receiver and not just, a few games out of the year, every game? And I think that's where Kevin's skill as a schemer, as a guy who has had a lot of success building young players up, really comes into fruition. So I'm excited to see how he gets his hands on them. Obviously, Kyle Pitts now gets franchise tag. You get him back, and I'm excited to see how they add. This has always been a team that Kevin Stefanski led teams that love to be physical and run the football, but I don't know if he's ever had the skill talent that he has coming in with it. So I think to me that gives me excitement, and I think it should give Falcons fans excitement because this is not a team that is far away from competing. A lot of times a new head coach, you're talking about 2-3 years rebuild. There's no reason why with Kevin this team can't be a playoff team in 2026.
Brought up Kyle Pitts. That's kind of been the news of the last couple of days. Getting the franchise tag. Why was that the right move for the Falcons at this point in time?
Well, clearly they weren't at a long-term extension yet because that's the preference. But I think that Kyle Pitts' question has been an annual question. You know, where is he health-wise? What can he do to take it to the next level? And I think last year we got to see the closest version of Kyle to his rookie year that we've seen since he's been there. And you saw a healthier version of Kyle. And when Kyle is healthy, probably one of the best 5 or 6 tight ends in football. And usually the franchise tag is for the top 5 players in football. So I think it makes sense. You know, the cap's rising. I think it's $15 million they're giving Kyle. It makes sense with the cap, what it is, to pay a top tight end that money. And if they don't get a long-term deal, it gives you one more year, you know, to evaluate, to, you know, for what it's worth, Kyle to prove he can stay healthy. And then you can parlay that potentially into a long-term deal. So we talked about the young talent they drafted. It means nothing if you can't retain that talent. And so I think getting him back, and then you start to think future years, if we can build this core of all the guys we drafted in back-to-back years together long-term, then, you know, this could be a special core that we look at for 5-10 years down the line.
Yeah, continuing along those lines, we've asked a lot of people about Kyle Pitts, about Bijan Robinson, about the quarterback position, but Drake London, you mentioned getting him to be a top 5 receiver. If you look at the per-game stats, right, and you can always make numbers work in your favor, but, like, he's right up there. I think he was like 3rd or 4th last season. The injury obviously kind of tailed those total numbers off, but how will he fit into Kevin Stefanski's offense, and kind of what have you seen from the number 1 receiver in a Kevin Stefanski offense?
Well, first of all, I think Drake London is one of the most underrated players in football, and I think if he talked a little bit more, people wouldn't have him underrated. But I think he's going to stay who he is. I mean, like, as far as the arrogance,
right?
Because he's a humble, like, he's talked more and more, but he's not your, you know, he's not your diva wide receiver 1, even though he plays like he can be. Like, if he wanted to be, his game says it. I think his size is what makes him so unique. And I know that coming out of the draft, there was a lot of the Mike Evans comparisons, but I think even over Mike, he has some playmaking and elusiveness that I think surprises cornerbacks sometimes. You always think about his jump ball ability and how he can make plays down the field in that capacity, but he can run past some dudes. He can make some plays with his yak ability, and I think the yak in particular is where you see people in Kevin Stefanski's offense kind of take off. You know, and so can you scheme Drake in some over-the-middle routes where he can not only go up and get the ball, but potentially take those 15-yard over routes and make them 50-yard touchdowns? And I've seen that in Kevin Stefanski's offense for years. And so I don't know if he's had a Drake London. And so, like, that to me is exciting to see. Okay, you know, you've had David Njoku do a lot of these routes. What if Drake London's running some of David Njoku's routes? What if you put Drake London in the slot and allow him to do some things as a big slot on 10 or 15 plays more a game? What could that unlock for the offense? I think those are the things that Falcons fans should get excited about. And I think what I've seen from Kevin in the past is he's willing to put people in different spots than they've always been, you know? And so I'm just thinking, you know, can we Bijan maybe playing some outside receiver and put Drake in the inside? Like, can we mix and match a little bit to use your playmaker skill sets to have this offense be unpredictable on a week-to-week basis for defenses?
I've been asking this question to pretty much everyone who sits down with us because I think it's probably the most important question of this offseason right now for the Falcons, and it's what you're doing at the quarterback position. Obviously, you know, Michael Penix coming off of the injury. Don't really know what that timeline of return looks like. So you have to go into the 2026 season with a plan. If you're sitting in, let's say, Ian Cunningham's seat, what thought process do you have about what you want to put in that room around Michael Penix, knowing that Kirk Cousins will be released once the start of the new league year gets here?
Yeah, let's call it what it is. They got to add a quarterback. Like, I think that first of all, I believe in Michael. I think that Michael is going to be the starting quarterback when he's healthy. But like you said, hope is not a strategy. You can't hope he's going to be ready week 1 or
Right.
hope he's ready in July. And so I think they need to put resources in a strong solution, whether that's going in free agency and saying, hey, is there not him per se, but is there a Daniel Jones type player where we're spending $10 million on a quarterback who may ultimately be a backup, but he could also start week 1 for us.
Yeah.
I think they've got to be willing to make those investments, and that's not a $3 million spend. That's not use a 5th round pick on a rookie. That's an investment. And so I don't know that we're expecting another 1st round surprise, but would it surprise me if they spent a 2nd or 3rd round pick on a quarterback? No. Would it surprise me if they spent a decent amount of money on a quarterback in free agency? No. I think you've got to prepare yourself as if this guy is going to be your starter all off season. And at some point we get Michael back during the season. So I think because of that, it makes it very unique. But this year in particular is a year where you have to essentially let Michael prove that he can stay healthy, get healthy, rather than counting on it as you may have done in previous years.
You brought up the draft. We'll end it here. What do you expect the Falcons to do? They've got 5 picks. They don't have a 1st round pick. Do you expect one side of the ball over the other? Do you expect any positions to be kind of heavy with their roster?
Yeah, last year was obviously a big pass rush draft. You go and get your 2 pass rushers, and those guys played really well, while they were on the field. I think this year it would be great to see them get difference makers who can impact the game as I guess the way I would describe it is guys that you have to game plan for on a particular basis. And for me, maybe that's a safety. Maybe that's a cornerback. Maybe that's a guy who can get his hands on the ball. I think you saw this past draft, they were able to draft guys who were able to contribute in year 1. What are our holes? Where can we find a guy that we can plug in and play and that can contribute to winning in year 1 for a team that's going to need a lot of this? So I don't know who those guys are going to be in the 2nd or 3rd round, but I think they've got to be open-minded in a way that last year I think they came into the draft, pass rush. I think this year is who are our impact players? Where can we find a guy that can help impact winning now?
Well, you are an impact reporter, so please go check out
Thank
Cam
you.
Wolfe's
Great
stuff
transition.
over at NFL Network, and thank you for sitting down with us.
Appreciate you. Thank you for the time.
We are sitting down now with Albert Breer, senior NFL reporter for the Monday Morning Quarterback. Albert, thank you for taking the time. I know it's a very busy week for you.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So Kevin Stefanski, hired now as Atlanta Falcons head coach. What does he bring to this team that doesn't feel like it's all that far off? Can he kind of help him get over the hump?
Yeah, I think, one of the things that's interesting about Kevin is he was part of taking Cleveland and elevating it, but he also, went through a lot of just wrong turns, like the Deshaun Watson trade is the most obvious example of it, but bumps, between the roster building process. They had a core of players there, and guys, some of them are still there, Myles Garrett, Denzel Ward, where they weren't quite able to maximize the prime of those guys. And I think going through a lot of that, there's great lessons. Now, Kevin did a lot right, and I think, getting to the playoffs in 20 and winning a playoff game for the first time there in forever with Baker Mayfield as the quarterback, and then getting back to the playoffs in 23 in the circumstances they were in, with the quarterback situation being the mess that it was, bringing in Joe Flacco, all of that different stuff. I think it gives you, a good base of success and track record. But I actually think, and I bet he'd tell you this too, that there was more for him to learn from the bumps that he went through and some of the ups and downs. And so I think you get the benefit of all of that, and a lot of times when guys get fired and then get a job right away, you'll see this symptom. Well, it must have been everybody else's fault, right? It must have been, and I think you saw it with Adam Gase at one point with the Jets, with Eric Mangini at one point with the Browns, where it's very easy if you're in that position, if somebody hires you right away or there's a lot of interest in you right away, to think, well, it must have been everybody else's fault. I think Kevin, because of all that he went through in Cleveland, won't be affected that same way. So I think they're in a really good spot with Kevin going forward.
Love to get your reaction to the news of the week in Falcons land, which is the franchise tag of Kyle Pitts and also the expected release of Kirk Cousins. circa March 11th when the new league year gets here. What did you make of those moves and kind of being the first chance that we're getting to talk with Ian Cunningham about why you make those moves?
Yeah, I mean, the Kirk Cousins thing I think was sort of something that's been on our radar since the season ended. I can't imagine Kirk would be back, but maybe you don't close the door on it based on however the free agent market goes. Kevin's obviously got the background with him from Minnesota. But I do think it's got to be taken as a positive sign just on where they're at with Michael Penix right now and what that's going to look like from an injury standpoint coming back from the ACL. And I would bet a lot of money they'll have some level of insurance against that, but it's at least a good sign that you're willing to move on, that you have confidence that Michael Penix will be where he needs to be when it counts. The Kyle Pitts thing's interesting because I don't need to tell you guys where this thing was and where this thing has been. Over the first 4 years of his career, it did not look good. I mean, there were points where, I quite frankly, he was not the best tight end on the team. He was playing less than other guys on the roster, and that was a merit thing. So for him to come back and have the breakthrough year with Zach Robinson as the OC last year, and you look, there's some scheme carryover to what Stefanski's going to do. I think it's really interesting. Now, do you negotiate a long-term deal with him? Are you confident enough in what you saw last year that wasn't just a flash in the pan? Or do you look at it and say, that's an affordable number, we can take a lump sum, let's see it for one more year? So it gives you some flexibility from that standpoint where you don't necessarily have to go all in based on 1 year of evidence. But the athletic traits have always been there, and I think we started to see last year what we all thought Kyle Pitts might be when he came out in 2021.
And obviously, Stefanski has a history of being able to get production out of the tight end position, so he knows how to use
for sure
those guys to the most of their ability. But you brought up something that I'm fascinated by, is kind of like when a head coach immediately jumps right back in to a different role. Do you think that, knowing Kevin, is he going to approach year one on this job differently than maybe he did with the Cleveland Browns? Now, we can set aside that it was a pandemic year, so there's all those sorts of things with it. But now that you almost get a second chance to do it for the first time again, or from square one again, do you think there are changes or differences that he would kind of...
So I think there's an interesting nuance there, and that he had a guy who was in that position last year or 2 years ago in his building, in Mike Vrabel. And Vrabel went there and was a consultant and kind of was had his hands in everything and was kind of involved in everything. And, Kevin got to see, here's a former head coach who is not reinventing himself, but adjusting some of the things he does. And maybe he's even more resolved in his beliefs on these things, but there are these tweaks you want to make. He saw Mike go through that, and he and Mike got, relatively close through that. And, I think Mike was very, very thankful to Kevin for giving him the opportunity to do that. So Kevin got to see that. Now, he doesn't have the year off where he's going to be able to go through all of it. But I do think, having seen that firsthand gives him kind of a blueprint for, how do I want to change things? I don't think he's going to be the same coach he was in Cleveland. I think that there are going to be some adjustments to the way that he does things. And, if you've spent 5 minutes around Kevin, you'd know he's pretty smart, pretty analytical, pretty level-headed. And so I think he's going to be realistic with himself about the things that he did right and the things that he did wrong.
We all know what the NFC South is. It's pretty bunched up, but it's also ripe for the taking.
Yeah.
As you're looking and evaluating in your seat where the Falcons stand in their own division, what needs to happen, you think, in 2026 that's going to get them over the hump in the NFC South?
Yeah, there are a lot of moving parts for sure. Tampa's sort of the team that I think we'd all agree has been the most consistent, really since Tom Brady signed there in 2020. So, I think they're sort of the standard bearer. Even if the Panthers won the division last year, can the Panthers come back and build upon, what they had? I think, obviously New Orleans, they came on at the end of the year. And
they were interesting.
Yeah, and so, with Tyler Shuck, does Tyler Shuck take another step? They've got some interesting offensive weapons, Chris Olave, Kamara's a million years old now, but still doing it. So I think that there's like a lot of moving parts in the NFC South, and I even with the Falcons, I mean, you have to ask the question, what's James Pierce where's he gonna be at, like, when you get to the season, and is that even a part of your is he even on your roster? Right. And it's sort of indicative of the way a lot of things are right now, in that we still have free agency, still have trades, still have the draft, and I think there are enough moving parts with all of these teams where I think it's a division where, like, all four of them, I think, can go into the season, go into the off season, go into free agency, go into the draft, go into the trade market, thinking we have a shot to win the division, like Carolina came up and did last year.
One of the things that is also kind of interesting at this point is when you have so many new leaders in a building, kind of getting to know each other while also having to make kind of franchise-defining decisions for at least the next months to years. Are there any examples of that you've seen really work, or a part of this process where you say, if you approach it this way, that you can maybe have this immediate cohesion and kind of identity moving forward quicker, sooner rather than later?
Yeah, we saw a bunch of them last year. I mean, New England, Jacksonville, Chicago. Yep. Now I think in each of those cases, a big piece of the puzzle was a quarterback playing better. Caleb played way better than he did as a rookie. Drake May played way better than he did as a rookie. Trevor Lawrence, really pulled himself off the mat and played well. So that's the first piece of the equation. And I think, again, like Kevin, his staff, Tommy Reese, I think those guys would tell you that it's going to have to start with Michael Penix getting healthy, and then Michael Penix playing really well. And first year coming off an ACL with all the damage that his body has taken over the years, that's an open question.
Tough.
But that's the commonality when you look at those three teams that I think would be the biggest turnaround stories of last year. And then I think, the other thing you can take from those places is just a very well-defined culture. And those teams knew what they were and who they were. And, in New England, very player-centric culture under Vrabel. In Chicago, it was a tough, difficult offseason. There was a little bit of a weeding out process, and you saw the Sean Payton, Dan Campbell, that program being implemented in Chicago, and it was having to make it through bumps and then coming out the other side. And then Jacksonville, I think there was almost a defiance to we aren't the little engine that could, screw you. There was that whole thing to them. So, I think it's a combination of you need the quarterback play, and then, it's establishing an identity and who you are, and that obviously is going to run through the head coach.
Awesome. Well, Albert, thank you so much for sitting down to take the time and chat a little Falcons football with us.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
It's our pleasure to be joined now by Charles Davis, who is an amazing analyst for the NFL Network and NFL
Sounds
on
like
CBS.
I wrote that myself.
Yeah?
Thank you.
That'll be easier next time if you
right?
want to.
Yeah,
if you want to
that's
sign
pretty
up.
good. Just keep that one. We'll keep it going. Just kidding.
The big news this offseason, one of the big news, Kevin Stefanski. What was your kind of in-the-moment reaction when the Falcons made it clear, hey, he's going to be our head coach?
Yeah, I thought it was, in the moment, I thought terrific, because known Kevin for a lot of years, actually knew Kevin all the way back before he became a position coach. So when you watch someone's journey and path, and then to see what they did in their first head coaching job, which normally when you get fired, right, everybody thinks, oh, what a failure. Okay, let's go back and look at what he did in Cleveland. They go to the playoffs twice. His first year there, they go, COVID year. He's coach of the year twice. I mean, he accomplished some things under some very difficult circumstances at times. Big quarterback signing, right, with Deshaun Watson. That didn't exactly turn out well, not because of Kevin Stefanski. A lot of injuries, doesn't happen. Those types of things set your team back. But I always thought his teams were competitive. They were right in there more than maybe what people gave him credit for. He's a good offensive mind. And I think the way that he goes about doing things on offense fits the personnel that are the leaders of Atlanta that we expect to be back next year. So I thought it was a very good hire by the Atlanta Falcons.
I want to tug on that thread a little bit more with kind of your evaluation of what he's taking over here in Atlanta. You talk about kind of the marrying of Kevin Stefanski, Tommy Reese, and also this run game in Atlanta with Bijan Robinson, obviously this veteran offensive line. What can you say about kind of what he's getting with this offense from your perspective?
What he's getting, I'm pretty sure he got a lot of texts from other coaches around the league going, man, I'd love to have what you have. I'd love to have what you're getting into. And just think about his successful time in Cleveland with Nick Chubb before he gets hurt, able to run the football, right? Big offensive line, multiple tight ends when they're operating that way, but also able to do it without multiple tight ends, be able to run a detached tight end like a Kyle Pitts would give you. But to be able to use a Bijan Robinson, a Tyler Algier, right? Whether it's Michael Penix or Kirk Cousins up until probably about today, right? That possibility of what you're doing, and then a big target to Drake London out wide. All of that fits exactly what he wants to do. Ball control, beat people up at the line of scrimmage, take care of the football in a big way, and have the ability to be explosive. And now you just keep adding the pieces along with it. I just think it's a perfect marriage. If I'm Bijan Robinson, I've got to just be jumping up and down because this is going to continue my path towards being one of the best in the NFL.
You mentioned Kyle Pitts, and we heard from General Manager Ian Cunningham earlier today that they plan to use the franchise tag on him.
Not surprised.
So you're not surprised. The thinking is, hey, this gives us more time to evaluate.
Certainly.
Obviously, new staff work with him, see what they can do. What does he need, in your opinion, to kind of show this year to really kind of get a longer-term future here in Atlanta?
Kyle Pitts 2025,
Okay.
being Kyle Pitts 2026. He'll have that opportunity as well with what Kevin Stefanski, Tommy Rees are going to want to do offensively. You know, when you're able to run the ball the way that they like to, and you have those backs that are able to run it, and let's not give short shrift to the offensive line the Atlanta Falcons have. That's a good offensive line. And it's a good line, again, that is used to, hey, we want to move people in the run game, all right? And when you get to that, now you're getting into bootleg, play action, all those other things that go along with it. It's just outstanding for them. For Kyle Pitts, that's perfect, right? If you're focused on, here comes the run game, now my quarterback boots out of there, I'm running an over route from left to right or from right to left, ball's in my hands quickly, plus his yards after the catch, all those things, everything that he has, I think, has the opportunity to increase this year. Not just what we saw last year, I think his numbers can be even better.
What are kind of your bucket items as you're looking at the Falcons going into this 2026 offseason as things that can take the roster to the next level and potentially get on top of the NFC South? What are some of those things that you're like, you know what, if they do that, I would believe in that?
Yeah, I just think that a continuation of what they did last year's draft. I mean, you're getting Xavier Watts, Billy Bowman in the back end, right? Obviously, the James Pierce situation is one that's going to resolve itself, but Jalen Walker's there, all right? So that was a big get. Continue to add to those pieces on that defense, on the defensive side of the ball, and find some consistency of play. I think that's where it's been the issue for Atlanta, right? When you look at what they've done, didn't you lose to New Orleans twice last year? Is that correct?
No. Beat New Orleans.
Who was it you lost to twice, though?
Carolina.
Yeah.
That's what I'm talking.
Yeah.
Yes, Carolina won the division.
Yep.
Was that really supposed to happen? The answer is no. The answer is absolutely no. That's not supposed to happen. Carolina won that division last year. It was a major surprise to everyone, including Carolina. Okay, so when you look at it that way, doesn't mean Carolina isn't going to get better because now they have confidence going. But the consistency of play is what it comes down to. Tampa Bay's looking around going, what just happened last year? They had one of those years where they're like, what just happened here? Whoever can be consistent in the AFC South tends to be that team for the year. I mean, it's just kind of how it's worked. No reason Atlanta can't be that team.
How do you view this year's draft class? You know, obviously the Falcons don't have a first-round pick.
Right.
Ian Cunningham seems like he is a fan of accruing capital.
Yeah.
But as it stands, they only have 5 picks. So where do you think the strengths of this draft class line up, and how are the Falcons positioned maybe in day 2 and day 3 to capitalize on that?
Listen, edge rushers, defensive linemen, a lot, okay? You can get second day, third day off-ball linebackers in this draft. I think you can get secondary guys in this draft. I do think that wide receiver is going to be extremely strong, but let's just be honest about it. The way we're playing football in 2026, let's all get together and figure out what year we're going to say, it's really down year for wide receivers. I just don't know it's going to be possible anymore. We play 7-on-7 in Pop Warner. Okay, I'm old enough that Texas, where we're getting so many receivers and quarterbacks from now, all you got was runners. Okay, that's all you got, because that's the way the game was played. Wishbone, triple option. The only time the ball was in the air when you pitched it to someone. Now, all these quarterbacks are playing 7-on-7, and so people have to go catch the football. They develop. It's that type of a draft again. It's not a quarterback draft, but I don't think the Falcons are worried about that right now. You just worry about getting Michael Penix healthy and ready to go. We shall see. Again, runners, I think, are coming back into the game.
Yeah.
And I don't know that we are at the stage that we used to be where we just simply said, we'll get a runner anytime. I don't know that we're having to do that. Plus, you got a couple that are pretty good right now.
Well, that's the thing, is like the evaluation of the running back position, especially after the Bijan Robinsons of the world and Saquon Barkley's, it changes.
When you have a special one, you go get him.
Right.
I mean, that's just kind of how it all works. And there are going to be a decent number of tight ends in this draft. I don't think it's as top-heavy as last year, though. When we're getting Warren and Colston Loveland at the top, I think Sadiq's going to be a very good player, but I wouldn't evaluate him the same way I evaluated those two last year.
So what do you like for the Falcons in the second round? Do you like those interior D-line?
I think that's a great spot to look for them. I think that's a great opportunity. If somehow one of those great edge guys somehow slips and makes it through, when I say slips, or they've got their eye on someone that doesn't get picked in the first round that could be available, because there's so many of them that are there, that would be another nice spot to go, obviously, after the Pierce situation. So I like defense for them way more than anything else, but I also wouldn't turn down fortifying the offensive line. All right? Jake Matthews has been going
I know.
all right, forever in 15 days. So he may play till he's 70, because the longevity in that family is really impressive.
I was going to say, he still has a long
It's
way to go to
really
catch
impressive.
his dad.
And if he's playing at 70, he's still going to be a very good player. But that's the one where you just kind of have to go ahead. I've always liked what Philadelphia's done. They've always seemed to draft that guy a year before.
Yeah.
Okay, so I don't know if you guys are baseball fans, but have you ever heard the name Branch Rickey? Branch Rickey was the great general manager back then of the Brooklyn Dodgers. He's the man who signed Jackie Robinson. And his draft philosophy was always better a year early than a year late. They would get rid of a player a year early rather than a year late. You take the heat when he has one more great year, but you know if it's near the end, you have to make those hard decisions. That's what you're trying to get done. In this case, it's not a hard decision. Just add to the offensive line.
Yeah, wise words, Charles. Thank you so much.
I don't know if they're wise or not, but it's great to visit with you guys, as always.
We'll say they're wise. But thank
Always
you
great
so
to
much.
see you. Take care.
We are joined now by Greg Auman of Fox Sports. Greg, thank you for taking the time during a very busy week here at the Combine.
Thanks for having me.
Sit down
happy
with
to be
us.
here.
So, biggest news for the Falcons this offseason, a lot of big news, but Kevin Stefanski at the top, new head coach. What do you think he's going to bring to a division that feels very wide open? And if the Falcons are able to kind of hit on a few of their offseason decisions, they could easily win this division.
Oh, yeah. I felt like NFC South was so jam-packed at the top, so tight, coming down to tiebreakers. It makes it wide open. I mean, all four teams in this division, I think, probably can go into the 26 with a certain degree of confidence. So for Atlanta, I mean, it's like, Stefanski, I felt like was one of the better, surer hires in the process. Like, you could go brand new and go with somebody who's a first-time head coach, but to kind of take advantage of somebody who not necessarily was expected to be available. And I think if you look at the entirety of his time in Cleveland, it's one of those where, two-time coach of the year, obviously can kind of put a big asterisk on the struggles they've had when you think about being saddled with a $230 million quarterback that's not playing for you. So I think given that, it's exciting to think about what he could do, how much better they can be on offense to pair him with the talent that's back. Kind of have to get quarterback figured out once you know who's healthy and when and all that. But no, I think this is something that gives them a lot of momentum. Anytime you're going through a complete rebrand like this, it's a big thing. But I think they've done a good job of generating some excitement and bringing in the right people for the franchise.
as we talk about 2026 and kind of where things stand in the NFC South and what you're talking about, like kind of everybody bunched up together as it has been. I mean, that's not anything new in this division, as you know. But when you evaluate where the Falcons roster is right now today, where do you feel like it compares to Bucks, Panthers, Saints?
Yeah, kind of right there. I mean, I think, you think about last year's draft and the impact that the Falcons were able to get with both pass rushers, with Watts, with just impact all over. That it's one of those where I think that was a really good draft. Obviously, it came at a cost in that you don't have a first rounder this year.
Right.
And everything that's happened with Pierce has complicated that a little bit. But I do think the core is there. All of those high first-round picks, now that Pitts is back, London's probably close to getting a deal. Obviously, Bijan is somebody you can build around in every aspect. I think you have the talent. The offensive line, you think about how much they've invested in that line to get it where it is, it's right there. I think there's question marks on all four teams. You have, obviously, the Bucs were almost two completely different teams last year, just so dominant early and not at all in the second half of the season. Carolina, I think, did really well to get where they got to from a win standpoint. It's like somebody, I think it's MGM, or somebody had season over-unders, like already win totals for this year.
Wow.
And it's really tight. It seems way too early to do that. They'll take their money now if you want. But it was like, I think the Bucs were atop the division with 8.5, which isn't the most flattering thing for the NFC South, but they were at 8.5. I think Atlanta was at 7.5, and New Orleans and Carolina were at 6.5, which isn't the nicest thing for Carolina. But all four teams, you think about quarterback. I think the Bucs have an advantage at quarterback because he's a known commodity.
Right.
And I think in Carolina you have Bryce, who's ascending but probably not arrived yet. Last year I felt like it was the first time they were winning games because of Bryce Young and not just him along for the ride. You saw a little bit with Penix in terms of the possibility of that, and I think once he's healthy again, that'll be in play. I don't know where Tyler Shuck fits into that. I think the way they finished, and I don't think many people expected them to make the push they made in the last 6 weeks of the season, but that gave some positive momentum where you really didn't expect it. It looked like just kind of the dregs of a first-year coach and a rookie quarterback and not everything coming together. So for them to have that, I think puts them in the conversation in a way that people, if you had said at Thanksgiving, you probably wouldn't have said they would be in that same tier. So I think every team has different things they're trying to address in free agency and the draft, so a lot can change. But all four right now should have confidence that if they're not the team to beat, they're within a game or two where if you just pull off, you think about what New Orleans did in the division, that gives you confidence where if you can just take care of things against lesser opponents out of the division, everything's in play. So that's exciting that way. I don't know that there's a more wide open division in the NFL than the NFC South. It's not the best division in the NFL, don't get me wrong. But in terms of top to bottom, everybody in play, it's hard to think there's somebody else that's harder to predict. And I think you probably have at least 3 teams that are getting picked nationally to win the division this fall.
What else is new when it comes to the NFC South, right? But because everything is so kind of wide open and also close at the same time, we're talking a lot about the quarterback position as the thing that gets the team over the hump, but it could just as easily be Atlanta's defense continuing to take another step forward like it did this past year, which I don't feel like became the storyline that it was in Atlanta or that I expected it to become. Them keeping Jeff Ulbrich on as defensive coordinator could be one of the sneaky moves of the offseason. What do you think we will see from Atlanta's defense in year 2 under him?
Yeah, that continuity is huge. And I think that, like you said, what we didn't really talk about much as a division, all 3. Like there was a world in which Evero in Carolina was going to get a job. He interviewed for like 3 head coaching jobs. I thought when New Orleans made their push, I wondered if Staley would get back in play. Yeah. And I think New Orleans and Carolina are both really fortunate to have them back. And along the same lines, for Atlanta to go through a coaching change and be able to hire someone good, even with the understanding that, hey, we'd like you to keep this guy. We like what they were doing on that side of the ball. I mean, Stefanski was talking about, he didn't necessarily know Ulbrich. These coaches are so well connected. So to have the trust to see the results of what's there and say, I can mesh with that, we can get along, is great and is huge. And so much of it's back. When you think about the free agents on that side of the ball, you have them, but they're not huge impact players. They're not, how are they going to keep all these guys? So I think, you think about edge, and now there might be a greater need there to add something. you think about Ebiketie being a free agent, you think about Ellis being a free agent. There's players you could lose, not necessarily on huge mega contracts, but just for continuity's sake. If you liked what the defense had, you kind of want to bring the band back together. Mm-hmm. So I think they have the wherewithal and the cap space to do that if they like that. To me, it's always one of the strongest signs for a team, even in a regime change, to say, we like the core players we have. We think we can do more with that. We don't have to go out and spend wildly to bring in extra pieces if we think the young pieces we have can grow together. And I think that's what you have on this Falcons defense.
So stick with me a little bit in this question. But there is a very interesting story that I feel like is happening in the NFC South that not a lot of people are talking about to the extent that I feel like it could be talked about. And it is the fact that Zach Robinson moves over after being the offensive coordinator in Atlanta, now the offensive coordinator in Tampa. He's coaching Baker Mayfield, who played for Kevin Stefanski, who is now the head coach of the Atlanta Falcons. Like, what do you make of the move of Zach Robinson to now coaching Baker, and also kind of like the weirdness of an offensive coordinator making a move within the division? Right. I don't think I've seen that I don't know if I've seen that in recent years across the league, like, at all. It's a very interesting move, and I would love your thoughts on that.
Yeah, at one point there was so many transactions where I think we said the division was like 6 degrees of Baker Mayfield. Like everybody has a tie. And it's like, how do you know Baker? And it's not quite like the McVay thing where there's a tree everywhere.
I was going to say it's McVay.
But again, it was one of those where, again, Dave Canales kind of got his job because he did well with Baker Mayfield and got to Carolina. So there's familiarity there. Brad Idzik, who's the coordinator there, was here with Baker. Obviously, Zach Robinson, I think so much of what the Bucs have tried to do in going through what is now, 5 coordinators in 5 years, 4 coordinators in 4 years, just the continuity of it. So it's neat in that, like, Liam Cohen, when he was there, he only had like 5 weeks with Baker Mayfield. There's this amazing 5 weeks at the end of 22 where he goes to the Rams and he gets there on a Tuesday and they win on a Thursday night.
Yeah. And Zach Robinson is
and Zach's there too.
Yeah,
So it was neat for me in that I did a story in October when the Bucs played the Rams, getting to kind of revisit that and tried to talk to all the key pieces and talk to Zach for that. Right. So it was neat in that you had that conversation not thinking, oh, you'll be coming to Tampa to work with Baker. But it was neat in that all of those pieces talked about Baker and how that Rams team was a defending Super Bowl champ in 22 that was like, I think 3-9 at that point. Just a colossal, had a lot of injuries. Stafford was hurt. Their line was all messed up. And that Baker thing just kind of gave them a jolt of positivity when they really needed it. Mm-hmm. And I think it really helped. McVay wasn't sure what he wanted to do. So I think it's neat in that it's just one of those things where they were only together. They only won 2 games together in that 5 weeks. It's not like they went 5-0. Right. Yeah. But I think because it was a cool thing that came together, you want to replicate that. So I think when the Bucs looked around, I think they had gone to the first-time coordinator like a bunch, 3 times in a row, and eventually that's going to bite you a little bit. It might have a little bit last year with Josh Broussard, but I think they liked that here was Zach Robinson, who had 2 years of strong play-calling experience, being an autonomous, running the offense guy. Obviously, I think what Zach and what the Falcons did against the Bucs the last 2 years, averaging 29 points a game, going 3-1. Yep. I think Todd Bowles even said yesterday, that's a pretty good audition if all you do is go in to that interview and kind of talk about, oh, yeah, I remember we saw you. It carries some weight. If you take pride in who you are as a defense, somebody that can solve it that well should be someone you respect. So I do think with Baker, there's the weird commonality where every week now feels like a rivalry week, and he's had some comments about Stefanski where he wasn't happy about that, and I think Kevin has tried to kind of diffuse that a little bit. I don't know if it'll be quite as dramatic when we get there, but there's all these storylines now where every week, I mean, again, there's some rivalries that don't need any. Falcons Saints doesn't necessarily need a lot of juice to get people excited about it, but now it feels like every week has a subplot and has whether it's Baker driven or not, has some drama that will be there before and after and during the game, which is neat.
Yeah, it is fascinating too when you just think about stylistically, Baker is different than Kirk or Michael Penix. So like there's a lot of intrigue there, and yeah, there's a little newfound rivalry, I feel like. But Greg, thank you so much for taking the time to sit down with us. Everybody, please go check out Greg Auman's work at Fox Sports.
Thanks again, guys. Really happy to be on.
Man, that was awesome. I hope you guys enjoyed the show. We've got so much more coming for you all tomorrow. Kind of the similar deal, different slate of guests But again, I really hope you enjoyed today's conversation. Some great questions, some great answers. It was a whole lot of fun. So again, stay tuned. We've got more of that coming your way from the Atlanta Falcons Podcast Network.